A luxurious restaurant on Park Avenue, crystal lights shimmering overhead. Amid the aristocratic murmurs, a resounding slap broke the air, freezing the entire room. The man Lucas Whitmore, real estate millionaire, had just struck the face of his pregnant wife. Claire clutched her belly, tears mingling with humiliation, while phones were raised high, capturing every moment. Within hours, all of New York erupted. An empire collapsed not because of the market, but because of a single hand, and that was only the beginning. Morning sunlight streamed through the transparent glass of Whitmore Tower, spilling across marble-polished corridors. The steady taps of expensive leather shoes echoed on the floor, reflecting the light like the rhythm of a hidden symphony. At the very center of the grand lobby hung a large portrait of Lucas Whitmore in an Armani suit. His sharp smile and cold eyes seemed to follow every person who entered, as if to remind them this was the domain of an undefeated man. Lucas had not been born into luxury. He grew up in a cramped Brooklyn apartment, where the blaring horns of trucks at night replaced lullabies, where the smell of gasoline and cheap pizza mixed in the air. Perhaps it was that harshness that forged in him something few in the upper class possessed, an iron will. With blood, sweat, and more than a few ruthless maneuvers, Lucas clawed his way up from nothing, building Whitmore Developments, an empire of real estate with dozens of towers casting their shadows across New York. At 42, he had it all: wealth, power, glowing press coverage, and a proud seat at Manhattan's table of elites. If Lucas was the cold face of success, then Claire, his wife, was its gentle light. Claire was not the kind of accessory spouse many moguls displayed. She held a master's degree in art history and worked as a curator at a museum on the Upper East Side. Her golden hair, clear blue eyes, and natural grace made her a constant subject of praise, a living example of the First Lady of New York real estate. Magazines often called them the Golden Couple of Manhattan, a flawless blend of power and elegance. But behind the camera lenses, the truth was far less glamorous. When Claire learned she was pregnant, joy overwhelmed her. In the blue of her eyes, it seemed as though a whole universe of hope had opened. She pictured a nursery with soft white curtains, imagined cradling her baby in the quiet of the night, dreamed of the moment Lucas would place his broad hand on her stomach to feel the small life growing within. But reality chilled her heart like a sudden frost. For Lucas, the news was more like a red warning light flashing on the highway of his life. A child meant cutting down on lavish parties, scaling back trips to Paris, Dubai, or the Amalfi Coast, the stages he believed necessary to maintain his image of power. In Lucas's world, fatherhood was not a point of pride, but a burden. Claire began to notice the shift. Lucas came home late, a trace of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his expensive shirts. The excuse of urgent meetings became a mantra, repeated so often she could recite it herself. He missed key prenatal appointments, and sometimes, in sudden outbursts she had never seen before, his eyes flickered with something cold, even cruel. In their bedroom, Claire taped ultrasound images to the vanity mirror. Each morning she sat silently before them, running her fingers across the blurry outlines of their child, clinging to the belief that their home was still intact. She recorded moments when Lucas showed tenderness, as though gathering rare gems to preserve proof that the man she loved still existed. Still, unease crept in. She overheard whispers in high society that Lucas might be entangled in an affair. Some friends quietly claimed to have seen him in dubious places, late into the night. Claire brushed it off, convincing herself it was only gossip. The man who once whisked her away to Santorini for her birthday to watch the sunset couldn't possibly betray her. Yet when Lucas walked through the door with a cold smile, when he brushed off her suggestion of couples therapy with a dismissive wave, when he spoke of the baby in the same tone he used for a real estate project, Claire knew in her heart that something was breaking. Late at night, in their luxurious apartment overlooking Central Park, Claire sat alone on the sofa, hand on her belly. The city lights glittered beyond the glass like 1,000 candles, yet inside her there was only a heavy darkness. That silence, seemingly serene, was in fact the void widening between two people who had once promised forever. She did not yet know her faith was about to shatter completely. For another woman, with a proud smile and eyes full of ambition, had already stepped into Lucas's life. And from there, the tragedy of a Manhattan family was about to begin. Music poured down from the gilded balcony of the Waldorf Astoria like rippling wine in a crystal glass. In a room thick with the scent of Cuban cigars and warm golden light, a voice rose husky and alluring, stopping the entire room in its tracks. Isabella Moretti, only 29, stood on the small stage, wrapped in a velvet green dress, eyes half closed as she crooned an old jazz tune. Her tone wasn't perfect, but it carried a raw edge, a scratch that made listeners believe she had truly lived, endured, and yearned. In the shadowed corner near the bar, Lucas Whitmore sat transfixed. He was accustomed to refined music at art galas, but this voice carried something different, a freedom, reckless and fiery. After months of marital weariness and the suffocating weight of maintaining a public image, Lucas felt as though he was breathing fresh air. When Isabella opened her eyes and caught his gaze, they held it for only a few seconds, yet it was enough for a secret flame to spark to life. When the set ended, Lucas approached with the confidence of a man used to getting everything he wanted. He needed no introduction. His face on the cover of Forbes was familiar to anyone who frequented New York's elite world. Isabella recognized him instantly, but chose to feign indifference. She offered a faint smile, withholding the admiration most women readily gave. In Lucas's world, that coolness was the most dangerous kind of bait. They began to see each other again at first, with nods exchanged in the hotel hallway, then with short conversations over martinis. Soon enough, secret rendezvous followed. To Lucas, Isabella was a rush of new air, young, daring, free of responsibility, a taste of reckless thrill. Each time she praised him as invincible, she inflated the fragile ego he had been struggling to uphold, letting him forget, if only for a moment, that his empire could crumble from within. For Isabella, Lucas was a golden ticket out of smoky lounges and meager tips. In him, she saw not just a man, but a doorway into a world of limousines, Hampton's cocktail parties, and private flights to Monaco. Her pride lay in having captured the attention of a Manhattan millionaire and in keeping it hidden. Their nights together became a sweet, forbidden ritual. They rented boutique hotel rooms in Soho or slipped into penthouses Lucas owned but rarely used. In those hours, Lucas felt reborn, as if he were once again the young man clawing his way up New York with nothing but his bare hands. And Isabella, staring at her reflection in marble-tiled bathrooms, saw her future shifting colors before her eyes. Both believed they were discreet. Lucas claimed urgent meetings, and Claire still trusted that her husband was busy with projects. In high society, fake smiles and averted glances helped conceal countless secrets. But in that same world, no secrets stayed hidden for long. Blurry photos of Lucas and Isabella passed through the hands of a hotel staffer, whispers spread at cocktail parties. In New York, it takes only 3 days for a story to become rumor, 7 days for rumor to turn into scandal, and then it spreads across the skyline. Claire didn't know everything, but she felt the growing distance. Sometimes, when she touched the sofa still carrying the trace of unfamiliar perfume, her heart clenched. Lucas remained nonchalant, certain that no one could touch Whitmore. What he didn't realize was that, in the age of smartphones and social media, one careless moment could detonate the empire he had spent 3 decades building. To Lucas, Isabella was merely a reckless breeze. But he had no idea that this very breeze would ignite the firestorm that would consume his world. Oh, dear audience, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and keep listening to the story. The twists are still to come. And please drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you find this story gripping, so we can keep bringing you more captivating tales. A message lit up on Claire's phone screen during what should have been a quiet evening. Just a few words. I think you need to see this. Beneath it was a blurry photo, clearly snapped from afar. But it was unmistakable. Lucas, dressed in a tailored tuxedo, his familiar smile intact, sat across from Isabella Moretti, her emerald silk dress glowing under the lights. On the table, 2 glasses of Chateau Margaux 1982 shimmered like undeniable evidence. Claire's heart shattered. For a moment, she could no longer feel the steady rhythm of the child inside her. Only a dull ringing in her ears and hands trembling so violently she could barely hold her phone. She rushed outside, flagged the first taxi she saw. The door slammed, and nighttime New York slid past the window, neon lights and glowing billboards blurring together, stabbing at her like mockery. Le Jardin d'Or, the most renowned French restaurant in Manhattan, was a place where tables had to be reserved months in advance. Claire had never imagined coming here under such circumstances. Heavy with pregnancy, mascara streaked with tears, her heart weighed down with unspoken grief. As she pushed through the revolving glass doors, the smell of butter and fine wine washed over her, embracing her like a cruel taunt. Inside the gilded dining room, the clinking of silverware on porcelain seemed to falter as every gaze followed Claire. She saw Lucas, instantly his smile for Isabella, so radiant it once convinced her she was the only woman in his world. Now, that smile belonged to someone else, and she was nothing more than an intruder breaking into a carefully staged scene of luxury. The restaurant hushed into silence. Claire walked straight toward their table. Her heels struck sharp, hollow notes against the marble floor, each step slicing deeper into the widening gulf between them. Lucas looked up, startled for a split second. Isabella's once proud face turned pale, lips quivering faintly. Claire stopped, her pregnant belly taut beneath her dress, her voice raspy and trembling, yet cutting through the silence. "I'm carrying your child, and this is what you do?" The air froze. Glasses halted midair, forks hung suspended. Every eye in the room locked on the table where high society's secret had just been ripped open. Lucas, long accustomed to scripting every scene, suddenly found himself exposed. Rage flickered in his eyes, cold and sharp, and then, in front of dozens of witnesses, he raised his hand. The slap cracked across the room, thunder splitting through gold and velvet. A wine glass trembled and toppled, its crimson contents spreading across the white linen like blood. Claire staggered, clutching her burning cheek, her eyes blurred with tears. In that devastating instant, she lost not only the last shred of respect for her husband, but also the fragile illusion of peace she had fought to preserve. The next sound was not music nor gasps, but the rapid-fire clicking of cameras. Smartphones lifted high, flashes popping, every moment captured, magnified, immortalized. Isabella froze, hands clutching her napkin as if it could anchor her. Waiters exchanged uneasy glances, uncertain whether to intervene or remain silent. And Lucas, realizing too late, knew that one act of fury had become a fatal strike against his career, his reputation, and the empire he had spent 3 decades building. Claire, one hand over her belly, turned slowly. Each footstep echoed in the silence, tolling like a funeral bell for their marriage and his name. Her figure, frail, yet unyielding, was the final image seared into the memories of all present. When the doors shut behind her, the room erupted into a storm of whispers. Someone gasped, "My God, he just slapped his wife in front of all of us." Phones buzzed furiously as videos flew into the digital ether, spreading like wildfire through a dry forest. Outside, taxis lined the glowing street. Claire stepped out, vision blurred, but shoulders squared. Within her, the child stirred, a small rhythm declaring she was not alone. One slap, one stunned room, and an entire city on the verge of eruption. The night at Le Jardin d'Or ended in tense silence, but only a few hours later, it erupted into a storm of fury on social media. A 17-second clip capturing the moment Lucas raised his hand and slapped Claire first appeared on an anonymous TikTok account. In just 10 minutes, the video surpassed 1 million views. The caption was blunt: "Millionaire slaps pregnant wife." Every frame was magnified, analyzed, debated. People paused at Lucas's icy glare, at Claire's staggering body, at the dark red wine spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. The hashtags number Justice for Claire and number End Domestic Violence spread across Twitter like fire racing through dry woods. With each passing second came thousands of tweets, hundreds of thousands of shares, propelling the video into a global spotlight. By the next morning, the news had exploded. CNN opened its broadcast with a clip, bold letters scrolling across the screen. Billionaire under fire. Fox News engaged in heated discussions about power culture and moral decay. On morning talk shows, legal experts analyzed possible prosecution. Psychologists pointed to signs of domestic violence. Even financial analysts predicted the market would punish Whitmore Developments for its moral scandal. And as expected, when the New York Stock Exchange opened, Whitmore shares plunged. The Bloomberg graph nosedived like a plane spiraling out of control. Investors fled, while the board of directors held an emergency meeting on the 52nd floor of Whitmore Tower. The same faces that once toasted Lucas now whispered about firing the CEO before the company loses all value. It wasn't just financial. Sponsors turned away in droves. A luxury car brand canceled a campaign. A tech conglomerate withdrew from a joint venture. In less than 24 hours, Lucas, once hailed as the real estate king, had become a man scorned by the entire city. In her vast apartment overlooking Central Park, Claire sat through the night, dark circles under her eyes. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from the press, from friends, from strangers, sending words of support. Yet only one call brought her to tears. Emily Parker, her closest friend since college, who showed up that very night. Emily asked nothing, said little, only placed a hand on Claire's shoulder, a presence that reminded her she wasn't alone. It was Emily who connected Claire with Janet Morales, the renowned lawyer known for dismantling powerful men in domestic abuse cases. Janet had dragged many figures of influence into the light, and now she looked at Claire with stern but understanding eyes. Claire absorbed every piece of counsel, and for the first time after endless days of suffering, she felt an unfamiliar strength stirring within. She knew that if she stayed silent, everything would be buried like countless other scandals in high society, a few rumors, a settlement, and then oblivion. But this time, Claire whispered to herself, I will not be silent. Outside, newspapers rushed to print, front pages plastered with the image of Claire clutching her belly as she left Le Jardin door. Headlines cut like blades. Empire built on silence, shattered by one slap. News channels layered graphics, spliced clips, added urgent soundtracks, spinning the event into a perfect media drama. Lucas, inside a room lined with mirrors and expensive suits, stared at his phone screen as insults poured endlessly. From tyrant, coward, to the most despicable man of the year, everything he had built the image of invincibility collapsed in a single night. In the city that never sleeps, the story spread faster than neon lights. Strangers whispered in coffee shops, taxi drivers tuned into radio commentary, even high school students shared the clip as a cautionary tale. Lucas's slap was no longer just a family matter. It had become a symbol of power abused, and of voices rising in defiance. Claire stood at the window, hand on her belly, feeling the faint kicks within. She knew the road ahead would be turbulent. The courts, the media, and the scrutiny of society. But in that moment, she understood that silence was dead. A cold gray morning settled over Manhattan. Crowds packed tightly in front of the district courthouse, reporters raising their cameras, long lenses aimed at the heavy wooden doors. The temporary metal barricades were nowhere near enough to hold back the wave of public outrage. Banners fluttered in the air, justice for Claire mingling with the thunder of shouted chants. Inside, the corridor leading to the courtroom gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights, so cold it made anyone shiver. Claire walked slowly, her frame fragile in a simple dress, her face pale yet her eyes burning with determination. Beside her was Janet Morales, the renowned lawyer, petite in stature but sharp as a blade, her presence cutting through the air like steel. On the opposite side, Lucas appeared. His deep blue tailored suit could not hide his exhaustion. Dark sunglasses covered part of his face, but not the hollowness etched around his eyes. The man who once strode confidently through art auctions now hunched his shoulders like someone searching for an escape. When the bell rang, the courtroom held its breath. The prosecutor began by projecting the fateful video. The sharp crack of the slap echoed from the speakers, making everyone flinch anew. In the clip, Claire staggered, clutching her cheek, her pregnant belly tense, while Lucas stood alone under the glare of countless raised cameras. Claire was called to the stand. Under the blazing lights, she kept her voice steady, though her eyes brimmed with tears. He didn't hesitate. That wasn't a moment of anger. That was a choice. The entire room fell silent. Her words weren't just testimony. They were a knife driven into the myth of invincibility Lucas had crafted for so long. Then came Isabella Moretti. Her hair hung loose, her makeup faint. Gone was the pride of the lounge singer who once captivated Lucas. Her voice shook but remained clear. 1 second he was smiling. The next, he struck. I've never seen eyes so terrifying. The image seared itself into everyone's mind, a smile vanishing, replaced by naked violence. A former employee of Whitmore Developments followed. He recounted the times Lucas slammed tables, shouted threats, even hurled documents at staff in boardrooms. He believed power gave him the right to do it, the witness muttered. Each word stacked like a brick, building a wall of evidence. Lucas wasn't just a successful millionaire, he was a man who used violence as a means of control. The judges scribbled notes intently. The jurors exchanged grave looks. Reporters later described the scene as a modern drama, each witness stepping forward like another climax in a play. But no one smiled. This tragedy was real, stained with blood and tears. The air grew taut as wire. And then, the true climax arrived when Lucas rose, choosing to defend himself. Removing his sunglasses, he revealed sunken eyes, straining to revive the charm that once inspired belief. He spoke of a poor childhood in Brooklyn, of clawing his way to the top with bare hands. His voice boomed, trying to summon sympathy. I'm only human. I made a mistake in a moment of weakness. For a heartbeat, some in the courtroom faltered. His rags to riches story had once been legend in Forbes, a shining symbol of the American dream, but the prosecutor would not relent. He stepped forward, his voice cold as ice. You were clear-headed enough to order a bottle of Margot 1982. Calm enough to laugh with your mistress. But when your pregnant wife walked in, you chose violence. That was not weakness. That was cruelty disguised. The courtroom froze. The words landed like a hammer. Lucas bowed his head, fists clenched, the path behind him erased. In the corner, Claire placed a hand on her belly. The baby stirred gently, reminding her she was fighting not only for herself, but for the life yet to be born. Janet glanced at her, eyes speaking without words. We did the right thing. Outside, hundreds of reporters waited, cameras ready to capture the moment of judgment. On social media, millions followed live updates, hashtags surging once more, as if the world sat in the front row of a gripping film. The courtroom seemed frozen in the moment after the prosecutor's icy rebuttal. Every eye turned toward Lucas. The man once hailed by the press as the King of Manhattan now stood trembling slightly, his hand gripping the wooden stand. He tried to summon the charm that had sealed billion-dollar deals, but his words came out hoarse, lifeless. He spoke of his poor childhood, of long nights in a dim Brooklyn apartment, of the crushing weight of carrying an empire on his shoulders. And then he reduced that fateful slap to 4 words, a moment of weakness. No one moved. The entire room fell into dead silence. The air was so heavy you could hear the slow click of a juror's pen twisting. Then, the prosecutor rose. His gaze swept across the chamber, his voice booming, razor-sharp. You were clear-headed enough to order a bottle of Margot 1982, calm enough to laugh with your mistress. But when your pregnant wife walked in, you chose violence. That was not weakness. That was cruelty. The words struck like a hammer. No room remained for sympathy. The oak-paneled walls of the courtroom seemed to echo back with a grim weight. Lucas bowed his head, shoulders collapsing, his final attempt to save himself dissolving into nothing. The judge signaled. The room held its breath as the jury returned after a brief deliberation. The 4 persons stood, voice firm, each word cutting the air. Guilty. In an instant, everything erupted. Cameras flashed relentlessly. The press captured the moment Lucas, once the untouchable icon, now hung his head like a ghost. From powerful CEO He had become a criminal, facing prison and the loss of the entire Whitmore Developments empire. On the witness stand, Claire broke into tears, but they were not tears of hatred, they were tears of vindication. She lifted her face, her trembling hand resting on her belly. The child shifted, in rhythm with her heartbeat. She whispered, unheard by anyone, "You will not grow up in silence and fear." Janet Morales, the ever-steely lawyer, gave a subtle nod, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. She knew this trial was not just one woman's victory. It was a warning bell for society itself. When truth is revealed, it can topple an empire. As Claire stepped out of the courthouse, the midday sun pierced through the thick clouds, casting a glow on her pale but radiant face. The crowd roared, women holding banners high to welcome her. Some reached out to grasp her hands, whispering that her story had given them the courage to leave their own violent relationships. For Claire, that was a reward greater than the verdict itself, becoming a small light of hope for others. Police escorted Lucas out the back door, shielding him from the furious crowd. Cameras still trailed him, capturing the image of the real estate mogul's wrists bound in cold steel cuffs. In that moment, Lucas was no longer Whitmore the millionaire, but a fallen man, crushed by the weight of his own cruelty. Back in the apartment once filled with flowers and luxury, Claire returned home. She removed the photos of parties from the wall, replacing them with ultrasound images of her baby. The room, once suffocating in silence, now echoed with the gentle music of her old record player, the symphony she had loved since her student days. For the first time in months, she felt peace within. But the aftermath was far from over. Financial papers began asking how many shadowy forces behind Lucas would collapse with him, who had profited from the Whitmore empire, and would they sit quietly as it burned? In the darkness of Wall Street, phones rang relentlessly, whispers circling, preparing for another battle. Claire did not know all of these calculations, but she sensed one truth. The future had opened not just for herself, but for all those who had once been forced into silence. And that midday sun breaking through the clouds was a simple affirmation: truth always finds its way back. And you, my dear audience, brace yourselves for the next twist in this jaw-dropping story. So, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're truly loving what I'm doing here. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe. Oh God, why now? Rachel clenched her trembling hand as the divorce papers fell onto the ultrasound table, where the steady beat of her baby's heart echoed. Her millionaire husband, who once promised to build an entire world for their family, now coldly pressed his pen to paper, abandoning his 7-month pregnant wife in that sterile white room. In that instant, everything collapsed. Love, dignity, and trust. But Rachel didn't yet realize that this betrayal would ignite a power game strong enough to shake all of Silicon Valley. News spread quickly through the Silicon Valley tech community. On Twitter and startup forums, everyone was buzzing about the $1 million divorce between Ethan and Rachel. There was no need for an official press release, just one blurry photo from the clinic was enough to set the valley ablaze, like an unexpected IPO. Someone had snapped the moment Ethan walked out of Stanford Hospital with his black briefcase, his face unflinching, while Rachel quietly followed behind, one hand holding her heavy pregnant belly. The photo spread like wildfire, igniting thousands of comments filled with speculation and mockery. In the startup world, news travels faster than the processing speed of the latest AI chip. Ethan Cole, the founder and CEO of one of Palo Alto's most promising AI startups, had been celebrated as a symbol of machine intelligence saving the world. But overnight, his aura was tainted with scandal. No one was talking about his TED Talks or his visionary tweets anymore. Instead, they whispered about the divorce papers he had coldly laid in front of his wife, right when the doctor hadn't even finished printing the baby's ultrasound image. At the startup gala later that week, the murmurs grew louder. Madison Green, Ethan's new mistress, showed up as living proof of the rumors. With her wavy blonde hair, a shimmering dress under the lights, and a phone always streaming live, Madison didn't need to say much. One sly half-smile into the camera, a glass of champagne raised against the glittering San Francisco rooftop backdrop, and the online audience knew exactly who the successful CEO's new home was. Rachel vanished from photos, from news coverage, from events. In the eyes of the community, she was nothing more than a shadow, an abandoned wife, her belly swollen with pregnancy, stripped of a voice in that glamorous world. The whispers grew crueler. She only lived off her husband. She had nothing of her own. What can a 35-year-old pregnant woman even do? Ethan continued to appear in the press, his face calm, unbothered. In a brief interview, he brushed it off as a personal decision, unrelated to work. The media nodded along. Investors smiled politely, while Madison stood beside him, eyes sparkling with her newfound spotlight. In the small apartment Rachel moved into after the blow, morning light filtered through the curtains, shining on her round belly as it shifted gently. She sat still on a wooden chair, her gaze fixed on the baby's heartbeat captured on the ultrasound printout. The world outside sneered, gossiped, and laughed. But inside Rachel, there was another kind of silence. The silence of someone waiting for the right moment to strike. She remembered the early days in the Palo Alto garage, when Ethan had only an old laptop and a whiteboard full of scribbles. Rachel had spent countless hours drafting the company's bylaws, preparing the first funding contracts, calculating every legal clause. She had once been a sharp, patient young lawyer, and it was she who had written the words that secured the company's future. Yet for years, Rachel chose to step back, letting Ethan shine, letting the magazine covers feature only his name. Now, in the eyes of the world, she was the weak one, the helpless victim. But the truth was different. Behind her quiet eyes, Rachel held a card no one expected. Silicon Valley, where people worship speed and boldness, rarely notices what happens in the shadows. Investors only care about growth charts. The media only chases the face in front of the camera. They forget that sometimes the silent ones are the ones holding the key. Rachel didn't lash out publicly, didn't answer journalists, didn't post a single status. She simply strolled slowly through the neighborhood, one hand on her belly, her eyes thoughtful, as if carrying an underground river inside her. The world thought she had already lost, but in truth she was mapping out her next move. When night fell, the wind swept through the valley, carrying echoes from the brightly lit offices of startups working around the clock. Rachel sat by the window, the laptop glow painting her tired but resolute face. Dozens of legal files, shareholding charts, and audit reports filled the screen. Her fingers glided over the keys, highlighting, annotating, connecting each data point like pieces of a larger puzzle. While Ethan reveled at parties and Madison flaunted luxury on social media, Rachel was quietly preparing her own game. Not a game of love, but a game of power. And if she won, she would reclaim not only her dignity, but also the balance of an entire cutthroat industry. The cruel whispers still echoed outside, but in her small apartment, Rachel allowed herself a faint smile. Sometimes, being underestimated is the greatest advantage of all. Dear audience, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and keep listening to the story. The twists are still to come. And please drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you find this story gripping, so we can keep bringing you more captivating tales. Inside an old wooden box at the end of the bookshelf, among stacks of dusty documents, there was a pale yellow envelope. Rachel opened it one quiet night, as the wind slipped through the window pane and the Palo Alto streetlights cast faint golden streaks across the room. The papers inside were the company's founding agreement, signed 10 years ago, proof that she was not the shadow the world believed her to be, but a true co-founder. 10 years earlier, when Ethan was still in a cramped garage with a duct-taped laptop and a whiteboard covered in messy formulas, Rachel had been a young corporate finance lawyer. She knew that no matter how brilliant an idea was, it could vanish without legal protection. While Ethan was buried in his AI models, Rachel spent long nights drafting the company's charter, checking each clause, negotiating with their first angel investor. The memory of that garage remained vivid. The smell of old motor oil, cold pizza boxes scattered on the floor, and the dim yellow glow of a single hanging bulb. Amid that clutter, Rachel spread the contract across a cardboard box and wrote the first lines of legal language. On paper, she quietly placed her name as co-founder, securing 35% equity, enough to protect the family, but discreet enough not to overshadow Ethan. Over the next decade, Ethan gradually became the golden face of next-generation AI. He stood on TED stages, painting visions of a future where artificial intelligence could heal diseases, manage traffic, even compose music. The media hailed him as the next Elon Musk. Venture funds lined up to pour in hundreds of millions. And Rachel? She chose to sit in the back row, or sometimes not show up at all, leaving only her crisp blue ink signature on the legal paperwork. What the public never knew was that in every single funding round, every legal document carried Rachel's signature. That ink was like an invisible thread, binding her to the company's journey. On countless nights while Ethan rehearsed his latest keynote, Rachel quietly combed through shareholder protections, fixing subtle traps hidden by overzealous investors. Her caution ensured Ethan didn't lose control too soon to greedy venture funds. But the world only saw the stage lights. They assumed Rachel was just the wife in the background, dependent and passive. No one realized that behind the paperwork she had built a legal fortress of her own. When Ethan laid the divorce papers on the ultrasound table, the shock cut like a knife. But only days later, when Rachel opened that yellow envelope, she understood. This was the card she had hidden for 10 years. In Silicon Valley's game, where the fastest usually wins, she held a different kind of power, the power of patience. Some nights Rachel sat alone in her small apartment, opening files of share allocations, her eyes lingering on her name printed boldly in the founder's list. That 35% wasn't just numbers. It was a flame enough to warm her wounded pride, enough to light the path forward. Past and present overlapped. Ethan laughing beside Madison at a rooftop party, and Ethan from years ago in the garage, glancing up to ask Rachel about equity clauses. The bitter truth struck her. He had forgotten who helped him lay the foundation. In the tech world, everything changes by the day. Startups rise and collapse like bubbles. But what is inked on paper endures. Rachel realized that when Ethan chose betrayal, he had also unknowingly handed her the chance to step into the light. Outside, the press still called her a shadow. The internet still sneered, she has nothing of her own. They didn't know that, right then. The entire legal history of the company was laid bare. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to spar on Twitter. All she needed was to wait for the right moment to flip her card. Late at night in Palo Alto, the tech towers still glowed as if they never slept. Rachel closed the envelope and slid it into a drawer, her gaze lingering on her gently shifting belly. The child about to be born would witness a different world, one where its mother was no longer a shadow, but the one holding the keys to an empire. Rachel hired an independent auditing team. The numbers that appeared on her laptop screen in her small apartment were like cold blades. Ethan had used investment funds to pay for a string of personal expenses, from a villa in Napa, a yacht in Sausalito, to covert funding for the fashion brand Madison flaunted on Instagram. What appeared weren't just dry numbers, but a whole portrait of extravagance. While investors believed every dollar would fuel groundbreaking AI research, Ethan turned it into wine parties on yacht decks, champagne bottles popping under the California sunset. Madison, grinning radiantly on Instagram, posed next to a pearl-white Tesla with the caption "Dream Life," but behind it all was the murky cash flow from the AI company. One decrypted email file. The shaky characters came into view, and Rachel read it again and again. Ethan had wired $2.5 million in consulting fees to a shell company under Madison's name. The company sounded fancy, like a media agency, but in reality had no office, no employees, just a rented mailbox. Rachel leaned back in her chair, her hand resting gently on her round belly. The child inside her stirred, as if to remind her that this betrayal wasn't just aimed at her, but at a family not yet born. This wasn't simply a broken marriage. It was large-scale financial fraud capable of sinking an empire currently being celebrated. Outside, Madison kept posting, as if her life were a never-ending movie. Silk dresses at gala parties, designer handbags tucked among PR packages, unboxing videos with a sweet smile. Followers saw luxury. Rachel saw receipts, company money, investor money, the money of people who believed they were helping change the world through AI. A trace of bitter humor slipped into Rachel's thoughts. While Ethan gave speeches about algorithms saving energy for humanity, he himself was burning money faster than any processing system could keep up. A Silicon Valley paradox. Those who trumpet technological revolutions can fall hardest to the simplest temptations: wine, cars, and fleeting social media admiration. The auditors delivered Rachel a thick stack of documents, each page marked with red tabs. She turned them one by one, as if reading an indictment that needed no prosecutor. Every wire transfer, every consulting contract, every absurd invoice was a knife slicing through Ethan's polished veneer. In the quiet room, the laptop's glow lit Rachel's face. No longer the tired look of an abandoned, pregnant woman, but the focused gaze of a lawyer, a strategist. Each detail clicked into place like the final pieces of a puzzle she had patiently guarded for 10 years. She no longer felt rage. Instead, she felt clarity. Ethan hadn't just betrayed their marriage vows, he had betrayed thousands of investors and employees who believed they were part of building the future. Rachel closed the binder, her eyes lingering on the last page where the total ran into tens of millions of dollars. The silence in the room grew thicker. But within her, a new determination rose. This truth would not stay buried. Outside her window, the tech towers glowed all night, where hundreds of engineers kept coding, convinced they were building something great. Rachel knew that when these proofs were revealed, not only Ethan but the entire community would have to face a harsh truth. Sometimes the monster isn't inside the AI algorithm, but inside human greed. Rachel placed her hand on her belly once more and smiled faintly. The child within her would be born into a world where justice did not come from slogans on a stage, but from silent, precise actions. On the day of the hearing in San Francisco, the sky was still early, but long rows of television vans had already filled the street in front of the towering glass building where Ethan's company was headquartered. Flashes flickered like a shower of stars, reflecting off the gleaming windows. Reporters crowded in, shouting names, cameras following every step of the central figure. Ethan walked in, his tailored suit fitting snugly, his face lit with a smug smile. He held his head high, as if this hearing were just a minor appointment in a busy CEO's schedule. Not far behind, Madison sat in the back row, phone in hand, live streaming. Pink hearts and clapping emojis poured across the screen, turning a grave moment into a virtual performance for thousands of fans. The hearing room was packed. Shareholders, SEC representatives, lawyers, and dozens of cameras. The atmosphere was thick, as though everyone was waiting for a drama to erupt right before their eyes. Ethan smiled, nodding casually at familiar faces among the investors, eyes gleaming with confidence. He believed a few clever lines, a trademark smile, and a vague promise about the future of AI would be enough to calm the storm. Then Rachel stood up. Not hurried, not loud. She wore a modest gray coat, her flats clicking firmly on the wooden floor. In her hands were thick audit files, each corner neatly clipped with red markers. The room fell silent, as if everyone realized they were about to witness something unusual. Rachel placed the stack of documents on the table. The soft thud echoed like a declaration. The first page was opened. A bank statement, black print with glaring red numbers. Ethan flinched briefly, but quickly regained composure, folding his arms against his chest. Madison kept smiling into her camera, unaware that those figures were already pulling the rug out from under her feet. The second page. Invoices from the Napa Villa, the Sausalito yacht, the Maldives vacations, all charged to the investment fund. Murmurs rippled through the room like waves. A few shareholders glanced at each other, suspicion in their eyes. The third page. A printed email showing $2.5 million labeled consulting fee. At the bottom, the name of a shell company registered under Madison. Gasps echoed across the hall. This time the camera zoomed in on Ethan's face, his smug grin gone, replaced by visible tension. Madison paused her live stream for a moment, lips pressed tight, before forcing a weak smile back at her online viewers. Each page turned was like a blade, shredding the glossy veneer of the tech empire. Reporters typed furiously, headlines forming on the spot. The hidden co-founder strikes back. Rachel didn't need to raise her voice. Her calm carried more weight than shouting ever could. She was no longer the crying victim. She was the co-founder, the keeper of evidence, the underestimated force. Her years of silence suddenly became her greatest strength, for when she finally spoke, no one dared interrupt. A major shareholder stood, demanding Ethan explain. Ethan tried to defend himself, but his trembling voice betrayed him. Those who once applauded sat in stony silence. Some board members scribbled notes. Others shook their heads. Rachel added just a few more pages, enough to turn suspicion into certainty. No one saw a visionary CEO anymore, only a man who had burned their trust to feed his own vanity. When she finally sat down, the room erupted. Reporters thrust microphones toward SEC lawyers. Shareholders demanded Ethan's resignation in unison. A decade of reputation collapsed in a single morning. In the corner, Madison quietly ended her live stream. The pink hearts vanished, replaced by a flood of furious comments. The glittering illusion fell apart faster than the 5 grams speeds she once promoted. Rachel neither smiled nor applauded. Her face was composed, but in her eyes a spark flared, not of pride, but of proof. She needed no defense, because the truth itself had already spoken for her. In the company's brightly lit boardroom, the polished wooden table reflected the fluorescent lights above. On its surface lay the document that would decide the fate of an entire empire. Ethan sat across from it, a silver fountain pen glinting in his hand, but his eyes no longer carried their usual smugness. In front of him, rows of shareholders sat silent as statues, waiting for the inevitable. With no way back, Ethan lowered his head and signed. The shaky stroke dragged across the page, as if even his own hand knew it was bringing an era to an end. When the pen lifted, a collective sigh filled the room, heavy, final. Rachel sat at the head of the table, her pregnant belly unmistakable beneath a simple gray dress. Her eyes shone, not with pride, but with the calm of someone who had proven her worth. At that exact moment, a sharp contraction surged from her belly. Rachel gripped the chair, her face briefly contorting. Each wave of pain struck like a drumbeat, announcing what could no longer be delayed. In an instant, the room that had been tense with financial stakes became the stage for another battle, between life demanding to be born and a body pushed to its limit. Her lawyer gestured quickly, and several staff rushed to help Rachel to her feet. Shoes clattered hurriedly across the floor. Medical calls echoed down the hallway. The media cameras, meant to capture a historic corporate moment, accidentally caught another instead. The live broadcast showed it all. A woman who had just triumphed in the boardroom now bending over, clutching her belly, preparing to give birth. Within minutes, the news spread. New female CEO hospitalized right after signing historic contract. Headlines filled every feed, paired with images of Ethan lowering his head at the table while Rachel was guided into an ambulance. For American audiences, it was a collision of two worlds, the ruthlessness of business and the sanctity of motherhood. In Stanford Hospital's hallway, the cameras still pointed at Ethan. The man who once believed himself invincible was now just a shadow. His suit was wrinkled, his tie askew. He tried to dodge the barrage of questions from reporters, but the flashes pursued him relentlessly. Every tense angle of his face was captured, becoming the symbol of a public downfall. Inside the emergency room, Rachel lay on the hospital bed, sweat pouring down her face. The monitor beeped rapidly, nurses' footsteps rushed around her. She clenched the sheet tightly, her eyes drifting for a moment, then sharpening again. Only minutes earlier, she had been sparring in a boardroom. Now, she was entering the most primal battle of her life. The broadcast images shocked the nation. Evening news shows all opened with the moment Rachel left the company, heavy with pregnancy, one hand on the freshly signed contract. One female anchor remarked, "This image will go down in history as proof of the resilience of American women. They can run a billion-dollar company and give birth on the same day." Meanwhile, Ethan was trapped in the media scrum outside. He had once commanded thousands of employees, once convinced the world's largest venture funds. But now, a few blunt questions from the press were enough to unravel him. His excuses caught in his throat. He turned his face away, avoiding the cameras, leaving behind the image of a fallen giant. Rachel, however, was different. She didn't need to answer a single reporter. Her actions spoke for themselves. From boardroom to delivery room, she had shown that true strength lies not in glamour, but in the ability to stand firm through pain, both of the spirit and of the body. The live broadcast continued. Images of the stretcher being pushed into the delivery room were cut alongside the sight of the boardroom doors closing behind Ethan. Two parallel storylines unfolded like a perfectly edited film. One person leaving the stage of power in disgrace, another stepping into childbirth in the light. The whole country watched. On social media, comments flooded in. "She just did the impossible. This is the real CEO. A new chapter for women in tech." Rachel heard none of it. In the sterile white room, all she felt were the contractions and her labored breaths. But in her eyes, a determined spark blazed. No matter the pain, she knew she was writing the next chapter not only for the company, but for her own small family. The baby was born at dawn, its cries shattering the heavy tension that had hung over the family for months. Rachel, sweat still beading on her forehead, held the child in her arms. Her eyes glowed exhausted yet fulfilled, as if every pain, every hearing, every whisper had been washed away by the baby's first sound. At the same time, in the upper floors of the San Francisco headquarters, the board of directors held an emergency meeting. The decision was announced immediately. Rachel Cole was officially the new CEO of the billion-dollar AI company. The news was broadcast live, spliced side by side with images of her lying in Stanford Hospital, cradling her newborn. That image became a symbol across the media. A woman who had not only given birth to a new life, but had also resurrected an empire. While America was flooded with congratulatory tweets, Madison began a live stream from a lavish rented penthouse. Her face was tense, her smile strained. "I'm not involved. It's all a misunderstanding," she repeated to tens of thousands of online viewers. Behind the glossy filters, panic was written all over her. But mid-broadcast, a torrent of leaked messages appeared. They were exchanges between her and Ethan, proof she had known about every shady transfer, even suggesting ways to cover it up legally. The comment feed exploded. Lines appeared in rapid fire. "She's complicit. It's over. The fantasy is done. This woman isn't just the mistress. She's an accomplice." Madison's face went pale as she scrambled to end the stream, but the video had already been clipped and spread across platforms. Within an hour, the influencer who once flaunted designer bags and wine became the emblem of deceit on social media. Ethan couldn't escape either. As he left the hospital, dozens of reporters were waiting. Not a single microphone asked about the future of AI. Instead, the barrage was relentless. "Did you falsify records? Did you use fund money for personal expenses? Do you think you deserve a place back in Silicon Valley?" Ethan stumbled, dodging questions, his face grim. Under the relentless flashes, the image of a tech giant had shrunk into nothing more than a weary silhouette. Inside the hospital, Rachel remained quiet. She neither knew nor cared that the media outside was spinning her life into breaking news. For her, the only moment that mattered was contained in that white room, arms around her child, a tiny heartbeat pressed against her chest, and the morning sunlight breaking through the curtains, glinting on her disheveled hair. In some way, that single image brought millions of Americans to tears. Because it wasn't just a story about a new CEO, not just a corporate takedown, it was the merging of humanity and intellect, a strength often underestimated in Silicon Valley's ruthless world. There were even comments tinged with humor. Ethan burned money faster than an AI chip processes data, but Rachel processed Ethan faster than broadband. The startup community, used to dry technical jargon, suddenly had a real-life story too cinematic to ignore, dramatic, resonant, unforgettable. Madison vanished from social media days later. Ethan faced an official SEC investigation. The gleaming glass walls of the company now bore Rachel's name, and headlines like "The Hidden Co-Founder Strikes Back" dominated the news. But to Rachel, all of it was background noise. The only image that mattered was her baby, sleeping peacefully in her arms. The story ended, yet its echo lingered. The morning light streamed through the hospital window, gilding the white blanket and softening Rachel's gentle smile. That was the final picture. A mother, a leader, a woman who had won not with spectacle, but with intellect, patience, and the strength of motherhood. And you, my dear audience, brace yourselves for the next twist in this jaw-dropping story. So, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're truly loving what I'm doing here. And drop a comment below, letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe.